The famous Russian ethnographer, biologist, anthropologist, and traveler Nikolai Nikolaevich Mikhluko-Maklay, who spent most of his life studying the indigenous population of Australia, Oceania, and Southeast Asia, including the Papuans of the northeastern coast of New Guinea, now called Maclay's Coast, a 300-kilometer stretch of the northeastern coast of New Guinea between 5 and 6° south latitude. His research was highly regarded during his lifetime. Given his merits, Mikhluko-Maklay's birthday on July 17th is unofficially celebrated in Russia as a professional holiday. Ethnographers' Day photo shows Nikolai Mikhluko-Maklay with Papuan Akhmat Malacca, Malaysia, 1874 or 1875. A Little History in Photos 22. The first Ferris wheel was built in 1893 by engineer George Washington Gale Ferris, Jr. It was installed at the World's Columbus Exposition in Chicago. The wheel was created as the American answer to the Eiffel Tower in Paris. Coloring photos in the studio of Inami in Yokohama, 1895 teased. Inami was one of the leading Japanese photographers of the 19th century, who left an extensive legacy of black and white photos and color slides with 3D effect. His work reflected Japanese life at the turn of the Meiji and Taisho eras. He was the only photographer of his time to work in every technique known at the time. He created unique large-format photographs collected in the so-called Yokohama albums, and small-format images, stereoscopic cards, slides for the projection lantern, magic lantern, and hand-colored photographs. His works are very valuable from artistic and historical points of view. They were popular with tourists and collectors already during the author's lifetime. Later, they were printed in millions of copies in books and periodicals. The photo shows the workshop of Inami, construction of the Trinity Bridge in St. Petersburg, 1901. In the summer of 1907, on the stage of Hammerstein Theater in New York, where vaudeville shows were very popular at the time, the audience first appeared before the Sober Sue. Sober Sue, famous as the woman who never laughed, theater management announced a reward of $1,000 to anyone who can laugh sober. Sue found quite a few willing, who began to go on stage, make grimaces, and tell jokes. Comedy actors found it a challenge and tried to show all their skills to make the woman laugh. However, all their efforts were in vain. On the face of the lady was not even a hint of a smile. Thanks to her seriousness, Sue became extremely popular. About her stone face, various versions were put forward. Some even suggested that she was partially blind or deaf, but no. She easily maintained a conversation and could tell exactly how many fingers she was shown. Later, it became known that the theater manager Willie Hammerstein deliberately pulled this adventure to lure the best comedians and not pay them for performances, for which he was convicted and imprisoned. But the actors never forgave him. Unfazed, Sue's fee for sitting in the theater was $20 a week. All that is known about Sue herself is that her real name was Susan Kelly, and that, in all likelihood, she suffered from Mobius syndrome, a rare congenital pathology characterized by a lack of facial expression due to facial nerve paralysis. However, unfazed Sue is still remembered by movie critics to this day. They use her name as a metaphor when talking about the movie. This comedy could make even Sober Sue laugh. Akatuyskaya prison, one of the main places of detention for political prisoners in the Russian Empire at the end of the Tsarist period, existed from 1829 to 1917. 625 kilometers from Chita. It was located at the Akatwisky silver mine in Nerchinsky district, Transbaikal region, Siberia. After the suppression of the Russian Revolution of 1905, thousands of political prisoners from the European part of Russia, as well as from Poland, Finland, Latvia, and Estonia, were exiled to Siberia. For a long time, convicted criminals and political prisoners were sent to Nerchinsk to work mining lead and silver ores at local mines. Convicts at geography classes 1908, April 11, 1909. About 100 people cast lots to equally divide 12 acres of purchased sand dunes. The place would eventually become the city of Tel Aviv. Brewery view of the finished product yard. St. James Gate Brewery, Guinness Brewery, 1906-1913, leased in 1759 for 45 Irish pounds a year for 9,000 years. To Arthur Guinness for 45 Irish pounds a year. St. James's Gate Brewery has been a Guinness fiefdom ever since. In 1838, it became the largest brewery in Ireland, and in 1886, the largest in the world, producing 1-2 million barrels of beer annually. Although it is no longer the world's largest brewery, it still ranks number 1 in the world for stout, a strong porter. The company had already bought back former leased property, and in the 19th and early 20th centuries, the brewery owned most of the buildings in the area, including many streets with brewers' houses and brewing-related offices. The brewery also had its own power station. Participants of attempts on the Tsar sincerely believed that the assassination of Alexander II would lead the country to revolution and make the country free, and this despite the fact that the emperor had changed all spheres of Russian society, from the establishment of a state bank and the creation of courts for people of all estates to the abolition of censorship. The first assassination took place near the gates of the Summer Garden. This time he invited his nephew and niece to join him and was already returning to the carriage when a shot was fired. The shot was fired by Dmitry Karakozov. He was so close that the shot would have come at point-blank range if not by chance. In the crowd that greeted the Tsar was hatmaker Osip Komisarov. He saw Karakozov snatch the pistol and pushed his hand. The shot missed him. Karakozov was barely saved. The crowd almost tore him to pieces. A similar situation was repeated in France, where the emperor arrived on an official visit. This time, an officer of the French Guard saw the shooter and managed to push the shooter's hand away. The bullet hit the horse. Attempt 3. Again, a similar situation. The emperor was returning on foot from a walk to the Winter Palace when he was shot at. This time help did not arrive immediately. The emperor was forced to run zigzagging away from the shooter. A total of 5 bullets were fired, but they all missed. 4th attempt. Each time the attempts became more and more sophisticated and the emperor's rescue more and more improbable. For the 4th time, Alexander had cheated death 3 times. Narodnaya Volya, a terrorist organization, decided to blow up the emperor's train. To do this, they planted bombs on 3 sections of his train. The first assassination attempt was thwarted by a change in the train's traffic pattern. The second, organized by Bakunin because the bomb was defective, the 3rd terrorist group had every chance of success. There was no doubt that the Tsar's train would pass through this section of the track. We just had to wait. In general, there were 2 trains. The first was carrying the things of the royal family and courtiers, and the second was carrying the emperor himself. The trains were separated by half an hour. The terrorists waited, but the unexpected happened. The train with things broke down. Not wishing to waste time, Alexander went first, and the train with things that followed him was blown up. Sofia Perovskaya was among the terrorists. Attempt number 5. This attempt is astonishing in its scale. It took place right in the Winter Palace. Once again, Sofia Perovskaya was at the center of the plot. When she learned that the basement of the Winter Palace was being renovated, she informed Narodnaya Volya. The terrorists introduced their own man, Stepan Kalturin, into the ranks of the workers who, when he came to work, carried dynamite along with the building materials. The amount of dynamite was small so that it would not be noticed, but it was brought every day. So the volume of explosives gradually grew. They decided to blow up Alexander on a special day. The Empress's brother was to arrive, on the occasion of which a festive dinner was to be given. Everything was ready. But the time had not yet come for the fatal assassination attempt. The prince's train was delayed, and therefore the emperor and the heir at the moment of the explosion were not in the dining room. They greeted the arrival in another part of the palace. And yet the explosion had terrible consequences. All the windows were broken. The walls were cracked in several places, the chandeliers were extinguished, and everything was covered with a thick layer of dust and tar. The whole large guardhouse where the men were housed was blown up, and everything fell more than a fathom deep. And in this heap of bricks, limestone slabs, and huge blocks of vaults and walls lay more than 50 soldiers, mostly wounded, covered with a layer of dust and blood. Attempt 6. After the 5th attempt, Alexander became a hostage in his own palace. He almost never left it, traveling only to change the guard in the manege. It was on March 1, 1881 that the People's Revolutionaries took advantage of this fate, did not wish Alexander's death. Twice that day the terrorists' plans were thwarted. First, the Tsar did not take his usual route. The bomb planted became useless. Sofia Perovskaya urgently changed the plan. Despite the fact that she was a woman, among the Narodolovists her position was very high. The 3 assassination attempts she had prepared had been thwarted only by chance. Now her ability to find a quick solution played into the hands of the Narodolovists. Perovskaya gave orders to take places on both sides of the embankment of the Catherine Canal. Here the carriage was bound to pass. At her sign, a wave of a white handkerchief, a bomb was to be thrown into the carriage. The bomb exploded, but miraculously the emperor was unharmed. The people's liberals were confused. How could this be possible? But instead of urgently returning to the palace, Alexander got out of the carriage. Through the smoke, the emperor approached his would-be assassin without noticing the man standing behind him. It was Grinovitsky, the people's commissar. Seizing an unexpected opportunity, he threw a bomb at the emperor. There was an explosion. The explosion blew off Alexander's legs. He was still alive. Nearby, almost around the corner, there was a hospital where he could have been operated on immediately. But the emperor ordered him to return home to the Winter Palace. The doctors fought desperately for his life, but their efforts were in vain. Alexander II died. Inuit girl with a husky puppy, 1920s. 2 bathers escorted by a female beach policeman in Chicago, Illinois, arrested for wearing bathing suits that are too short, April 1922. Photo shows a triple-decker bus in Berlin, Germany, 1926. Cirrus, Indeed, one might think that the photo shows a triple-decker bus with the Stettiner BHF route in Berlin, Germany, alas. However, this was a classic prank from nearly 100 years ago. On April 1, 1926, the German magazine Echo Continental announced the development of a new triple-decker bus for Berlin. They also showed a clever modeled photograph as proof of this development. Echo Continental magazine was the trade publication of car and truck parts manufacturer Continental AG. They covered popular sporting and racing events and classic reporting, including comic strips and humorous stories. Echo Continental employed some of the best illustrators of the time. That's why the photography seems so real. Now there are many fake photoshopped photos as well as videos showing triple-decker buses. For example, there is a video on the internet that supposedly shows a three-decker bus in India. In fact, it is just an additional visual effect. The third floor of the bus is just a superimposed copy of the second floor. Three-decker buses have never been seriously considered because of problems such as their high center of gravity making them unstable, and because of the risk of collision with trees and bridges. Nevertheless, some triple-decker buses have been developed in European countries such as Italy, pictured. However, in almost all models, the third level was a small compartment at the rear of the bus. A new way of life. Peasant women go to cultivate farmland while their children remain in the nursery. Photo by Arkady Shaiket, 1927. Moscow Province, Kolomenskoye Village, Kolomenskoye Collective Farm, Ogorodny Giant. The crew of the battleship Marat, listening to the participants of their ship's musical amateur performance USSR. Jewish woman hides her face as she is photographed on a park bench in Germany with a sign that reads, "For Jews Only." 1938. A cashier counts out a customer at a giant company grocery store, Washington, D.C. June 1942. Prisoners of the Dora Mittelbau concentration camp assembling tail fins for Pfau-2 rockets at the Mittelwerk underground factory in Nordhausen, Germany. Germany, 1944. Reinhard Heydrich, 1904-1942, was a Nazi with a reputation as a monster responsible for the deaths of millions of innocent people, chief of the General Directorate of Imperial Security, SS Obergruppenführer and police general, one of the organizers of the Holocaust. Intelligent, ruthless, and ambitious. In May 1942, Reinhard was mortally wounded by members of the Czech resistance and died a few days later. His younger brother, pictured left, Heinz Heydrich, 1905-1944, was an SS lieutenant, journalist, and publisher of Die Panzerfaust. Like his older brother, he was a supporter of Hitler, but only learned the brutality of his ideology after his brother's death. After his brother's assassination in 1942, Heinz received a large stack of his papers. He read the documents all night and then burned them, realizing the enormity of the final solution to the Jewish question, which he had not known before. From that moment on, Heinz became active in helping Jews. He used the printing presses of his publishing house to forge documents for prisoners, helping them to escape. In November 1944, the Gestapo investigated the editorial staff of his newspaper. At the time, Heinz believed that the Nazis had learned that he supported Jews and shot himself to save his family. But as it turned out later, the Gestapo only wanted to find out the reason for the large amount of paper wasted. French resistance fighters, including 18-year-old Simone Seguin, during the liberation of Paris in 1944. U.S. Third Army soldiers searched prisoners in the town of Koblenz, 1945. Construction of the United Nations building against the backdrop of the Empire State Building, 1949. New York. A Korean child sits in the smoldering ruins of a house destroyed by Fire Suwon on February 3, 1951, when U.S. troops burned down dwellings that could serve as shelter. Water jugs are the only things left intact. In 1951, Japan's Shigeki Tanaka was the first to finish the traditional Boston Marathon. 6 years earlier, Tanaka had survived an atomic strike by the U.S. Air Force in Hiroshima. The crowd met the finish line of the Japanese with complete silence. Marilyn Monroe without makeup, 1955. Children watching a production of St. George Slays the Dragon at the Tuileries Puppet Theater in Paris, 1963. Flood on Neglinaya Street, Moscow, June 1965. The very first Soviet video recorder, and it is not VM-12 as many people think its appearance occurred back in 1967, when the first household VCR Malakit went on sale, and the Project VHS, which appeared in 1976, did not even exist in fantasies. The device was reel-to-reel, produced at the Riga Radio Factory, RRR. The tape used was imported, according to some sources, from Sony 25 4mm wide. The tape recorder could record black and white TV programs from a TV set using a matching device or from a video camera attached to it. Red Light District, Amsterdam, 1968. Armed students led by Ed Whitfield, far right, leave Cornell University's Straight Hall in Ithaca, NY after a 36-hour sit-in on April 20, 1969. Students barricaded themselves in the building. Armed students from the African American community spoke out against racism on campus. And for more programs for black students, university administrators agreed to rescind the punishment some black students had previously received and expedited the opening of the African American Studies Center. Photo by Steve Starr. The first run of the legendary sport Lotto ran in late October 1970. It all started in 1969 with the idea to hold the Olympic Games in the USSR. The event of such a scale required colossal financial expenditures. To realize the project, it was necessary to attract additional funds to reduce the cost to the budget. Officials found out that a significant share of funds came from lotteries, which were a huge success abroad. The countries of the socialist camp were no exception, and the sports committee decided to introduce gambling for the Soviet people. The proceeds from the sale of lottery tickets were divided into 2 equal parts. One was sent to the Soviet sports budget. The second was distributed among the lottery winners. The Soviet variation was based on the 6 out of 49 formula. According to the rules of the game, the jackpot went to the player who was lucky enough to guess all the numbers of the winning combination. The organizers emphasized the lottery's involvement with the sports committee by tying a certain sport to each number. Due to the symbolic cost, 30 kopecks lottery tickets sold well. The first draw sold 1.5 million cards. It is noteworthy that the first draw was marked by winning the main prize, which went to the capital's engineer economist Lydia Morozova. The Muscovite won 5,000 rubles, which was a lot of money in Soviet times. For comparison, the average salary then was less than 200 rubles. 5,000 rubles could be used to buy a brand new Moskvich. Almost all Soviet newspapers wrote about the success of the first winner. The first drawings were drawn every 10 days without broadcasting on television. The newspapers printed a circulation table with the result of the game, which took up an entire spread. It is noteworthy that at the beginning the organizers did without the famous Lottotron. The members of the circulation committee manually rotated a transparent drum, and the presenters took out the numbered balls by hand. As the popularity grew, the losing players tried to accuse the organizers of cheating, looking for a trick. They said that the players pulling out the balls were cheating. In order to calm the passions, it was decided to automate the process. Soon there appeared a device called a Lottotron. Now the game balls were mixed in the drum mechanically. Winning numbers were extracted automatically, completely eliminating the human factor. The first Lottotron appeared thanks to the developments of Estonian designers. In 1974, the draws moved to the TV studio of Central TV. It is not easy to win the jackpot in 6 of 49. In order to interest players and attract new participants, the organizers introduced another lottery. The novelty was played according to the abbreviated formula 5 out of 36, which implied that one of 270,000 participants would win the jackpot. At the peak of popularity, up to 10 million lottery tickets were sold for each draw. Almost 70% of the population of the vast country participated in the game of chance. For 20 years, the game brought to the treasury of Soviet sports 500 billion rubles. At that time, the income from Sport Lotto covered 80% of the sports budget. Initially, the program Sport Lotto was broadcast on Wednesdays. Later, Saturday was added. Then the draws 6 of 49 and 5 of 36 began to be played every Sunday. The jackpot increased from 5,000 rubles to 10,000. Under the new rules, the lucky winners were allowed to buy a car out of turn. After the Summer Olympics, the popularity of Sport Lotto began to fade. But in 1982, the screen came to the comedy Leonid Gaidai, Sport Lotto 82. The comedy, which won huge audience love, became the most talented advertising in the history of the USSR. Only in 1982, the movie Sport Lotto 82 was seen by more than 50 million people, and as a consequence, a new surge of interest in the game. USSR 70's last call. Deputy Chairman of the Revolutionary Command Council of the Iraqi Republic Saddam Hussein and Leonid Brezhnev in Moscow, March 24, 1973. Spectators react to the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger 73 seconds after liftoff, January 28, 1986. On July 30, 1987, Indian Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, arriving in Sri Lanka on an official visit, was walking past an honor guard to meet President Junius Jayawardene. Suddenly, one of the sailors standing guard brought the butt of his rifle down on his head with all his might. Had the assailant hit Rajiv on the back of the head, his premiership might well have ended there. But Rajiv managed to dodge and got away with a broken shoulder. And the unlucky assassin, Vijithu Rohana de Silva, was rounded up. Rohana de Silva was a Sinhalese and believed that it was Rajiv who had armed the tigers, and that India's intervention in the conflict was intended to eliminate Sinhalese statehood. In the summer of 1987, Indian soldiers arrived in Lanka to help the central Sinhalese government deal with the Tamil separatists. This decision would cost Rajiv his life. He would be blown up by the liberation tigers of Tamil Eelam in 1991. The court decided that Rohana de Silva had no intention of killing Rajiv. If he wanted to kill, he would have stabbed him with a bayonet instead of hitting him with a rifle butt, and sentenced him to only 6 years in prison. After his release, Rohana de Silva unsuccessfully tried to be elected to parliament from one of the ultra-nationalist parties, and then retired from political affairs and became a famous astrologer. A woman in the kitchen studying German humanitarian aid with interest Moscow. 1990, hypnotist and psychotherapist Anatoly Kashpirovsky holds a healing session with Galina Brezhneva. 1991, Moscow. In 1992, John Thompson, an 18-year-old kid from Robbinsdale, Minnesota, was working in his parents' field and his hands were pulled into a running tractor. His right arm was severed at the shoulder and his left arm above the elbow. After reaching the house in a state of shock, which is about 100 meters up the hill, he opened the outer mosquito door with the remains of his left arm and the main door with his teeth. Next, after unsuccessfully trying to dial his relatives with his nose, their little town wasn't directly connected to 911, he used the pencil in his teeth. Next, he went to the bathroom and lay down in the bathtub too. In his words, avoid getting his mom's carpet dirty, earning him the lifelong nickname, the kid in the bathtub. That's American humor. The severed hands continued to lie in the yard. In the photo, you see John with surgeon Kurt Johala, who performed the unique operation of sewing both limbs back on. Today, John is unemployed. After the successful operation, he became famous. He started to be invited to radio and TV programs, interviewed by newspapers and magazines. But nothing lasts forever. One day, interest in him faded. The question arose as to how to live on employers did not risk hiring him because of his disability. In spite of everything, John got a job as a realtor in his hometown. For several years, he successfully sold and bought real estate. But one day, the agency closed and John found himself on the street. Now he lives on welfare. It is not easy for him because his hands, despite 30 surgeries, have not fully recovered. John cannot write, say hello, or button his shirt, although he can type faster than many others on a computer keyboard.